Again, a very warm welcome to our today's webinar on the Chinese corporate social credit system. That is a great topic of great relevance to business today in China, but the topic itself is so great. We will see, but we have seen that there's a keen interest on the topic. We have had overbooked seminar, so it's a large audience today with us. So we are very grateful for your interest in the topic. First of all, I would like to thank our sponsors, whom you can see on our website here. In the seminar, as we have promised, we will address the most crucial questions on the topic. And we have two speakers with us today with experience on the ground and also knowledge about the ongoing development of the framework. It is a bit of a moving target, as we all know. They are Hailin Wang from Sinolytics and Sabine Neuhaus from Kellerhals Garar. Hailin Wang is a consultant, experienced consultant with Sinolytics, focusing on industrial policy, environment regulations, as well as novel regulatory concepts such as internet and supervision and the corporate social credit system. Sinolytics is a European research-based consultancy entirely focused on China and the policy business nexus with offices in Beijing, Berlin, and Zurich. They have consulted tens of clients providing in-depth research and expert analysis on the corporate social credit system. Sabine Neuhaus is based in the Shanghai office of Kellerhals Garar. She's an attorney at law, and she advises clients primarily in the areas of M&A, PE investments, contract law, joint ventures, and international arbitration in Switzerland and in China. She has also extensive knowledge in international arbitration, as she has been involved in arbitration proceedings in the construction sector, contract, and post-M&A dispute. She is also a board member of the Swiss Cham Shanghai, the co-head of the legal committee there and the vice chair of its SME committee. And she's the vice president of the Moot Court Alumni Association. Well, we will start with Hailin Wang first. He will address the first three questions, I should say, and Sabine Neuhaus will address the remaining parts. You saw the questions in the invitation, and that's probably why it's been so attractive to learn about all these issues. As a special guest in the last part, that's a addition that we added, I would like to welcome Stefan Barney. He's the director of Global Network Switzerland Global Enterprise. And the SGE Hub has in fact carried out a research among the Swiss companies based in China on the ongoing development of the corporate social credit system. So we're very happy to have Stefan Barney with us, who will give us most relevant insights into the experiences of Swiss enterprises in China with this new system. His impact speech will be followed by a Q&A, so please feel free to use the Q&A function during the webinar. We will take that up in the last part of the seminar. I should mention that we do record this event, this webinar, so be aware of this. And with this, I would like to hand over the screen, so to say, to Hailin Wang for his presentation. Thank you, Hailin.
Thanks a lot, Esther, and also many thanks to SCCC, Swiss Chinese Chamber of Commerce, for having me here today and giving me the opportunity to discuss this very interesting topic with everyone here who I believe is connected to China somehow. Next slide, please. Yes, I'm Hailin Wang, Wang Hailin. I have been living in Switzerland since 2016, in Baselstadt actually. I worked in China before, and then I moved to Switzerland for my master in legal philosophy in University of Bern. And then after that, I started working for Sinolytics. Next slide, please. Sinolytics is a European-based consulting firm focused on China and the policy business nexus. We have offices in Zurich, where I'm working, and also in Beijing and in Berlin. We advise our clients on many topics, including sustainability, cybersecurity, industrial policy, and of course, CSCS. And we actually have a quite large team of CSCS, 8 persons, and you can see me on the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. And we have been quite actively engaging in public discussions of this topic, both in Switzerland and also in EU. And actually on the left side of the slide, you can see an article by me about CSCS, which was published on Eurobiz magazine a few days ago. Next slide, please. But today, I would like to discuss 4 questions with everyone here. First, why was the system started? Second, how does it affect the companies? And third, where it is heading? What are the future development trends? And lastly, how do you get it organized to be prepared for this system? Next slide, please. To answer the question of why the Chinese government started this system, we need to look at another familiar concept of the optimization of the business environment. The Chinese government has been trying to optimize the business environment in the past years. They have started to reform our government functions and have proposed some supervision tools. One of these is called the credit supervision, 信用监管 in Chinese, or what we normally call the social credit system. So the takeaway, the key message here is that the social credit system is actually part of China's broad market government functions reform, which intends to optimize the business environment in China. And you must be asking yourself, like, why, how could the social credit system actually help optimize the business environment in China? To answer this question, we must need to know what is CSCS and how does it work. Next 2 slides, please. And we start from a life cycle analysis of regulations for companies in China, right? We start from left, ex-ante regulation, which means the regulation that happens before an incident starts, right? If you want to enter the market in China, if you want to do business in China, there are a lot of admin approvals and production permissions you need to do before you get that license. And also, there are a lot of requirements to be met if you want to get these permissions. The Chinese government has been trying to decrease ex-ante regulation. First, the number of production permissions and admin approvals have greatly decreased in the last years. Second, there has been an application of credit promise letter, which means that you don't have to provide a lot of materials to prove you are qualified for all these permissions. You only have to sign one credit promise letter where you basically say, okay, I promise to Chinese government, I'm qualified for all these permissions. And the decrease of ex-ante regulation, however, does not mean there's no more regulation. Something has been increased. Here comes the interim regulation and ex-post regulation. Interim regulation means that the regulation comes while you have been conducting your business or the incident is going on. By the end of 2019, there had been about 120 million market entities in China. It is impossible to conduct ex-ante regulation for 120 million market entities, and also is not efficient. I mean, the whole reform intends to increase the efficiency and the vitality of the market. That's why they have the interim regulation. You can enter the market with less entry barriers. You can start your business before these regulations. Now, let's say while you're manufacturing your products in China, the regulators come, they come to inspect you. They come to see if you are complying with, let's say, the environmental protection law, if you are complying with the cybersecurity law. And during these inspections, they make notes about your performance, right? Oh, your company maybe is not compliant with the cybersecurity law. And based on all these notes, or what we call the credit information, the first 3 categories of mechanism coming from the social credit system have been developed. First, non-compliance record. Under CSCS, any non-compliance with Chinese laws and regulations would lead to a negative record in the system. This is like an overview of your compliance situation in China. Second, scale ratings. Different regulators have sent out different, let's say, rating requirements or rating standards, and based on these standards and the observation about your companies in China, you will get a scale rating result. Third, comprehensive credit score, or normally we call it one score. As the name indicates, it's comprehensive, means that this is a one score that is calculated based on your overall performance across all regulatory fields. And all these 3 categories of mechanism indicate your degree of compliance in China. Let's say if you have a high degree of compliance, the Chinese government may think, okay, this company is trustworthy, so we don't have to put so much resources to regulate this company. But then if you have low degree of compliance, you will be the focus of the regulators, and they will put more attention on you. So, and then in the worst case, if you have some very serious misbehaviors, this will lead to joint sanctions. What does joint mean here? Let's say you have a misbehavior in taxation. You are not only under CACS, you are not only going to be sanctioned by the taxation ministry, but also you are going to be sanctioned by many other ministries, including customs, Ministry of Finance, or even Ministry of Education, actually. But at the end, the key takeaway of this slide is that there have been 4 mechanisms, 4 categories of mechanisms that are affecting your companies in China. First, non-compliance record. Second, scale ratings. Third, comprehensive credit score. And lastly, joint sanctions. Next slide, please. Here on this slide, we provide some examples of or evidence for all these 4 categories of mechanisms. From the top right, we have the non-compliance record. As you can see the picture, that's a negative record from the Credit China platform. Then for the second one, we take for scale ratings, we take the environmental protection example scale rating in Jiangsu province. As you can see from the picture, there are different colors, right? You see green, blue, red, and black. That's actually the rating result you get for environmental protection in Jiangsu. Of course, it doesn't have to be, these colors. It can be A, B, C, D, or good or bad, or 1, 2, 3. I mean, for example, you got A, B, C, D, M for taxation rate in China. And third, you have the example of a comprehensive credit score, or the one score. I think an important point about the one score is that nationwide is not fully implemented yet, but in Zhejiang province, it is fully implemented. That means if you have companies in Zhejiang, you already get this one score for your companies in Zhejiang. And lastly, we have the example of a joint sanction of production safety. If you have certain misbehaviors from production safety, then you are jointly sanctioned by many other ministries, as I said, taxation, customs, and the Ministry of Environment and Ecology. Next slide, please. I have to say the system has been implemented, and what is already here about the system already has a huge impact on your companies in China. But I have to admit, not all ministries in China are implementing these 4 categories of mechanisms to the same extent. Some are having joint sanctions only, some only having scale ratings, and the one score only exists in Zhejiang province for now. But then here I take an example of IPR protection to see how the system has evolved in the past years in the field of IPR protection. In 2015, the IPR Bureau firstly said they're going to start implementing the State Council's reform of government functions, the broad regulatory change reform. And in 2016, they started accelerating the construction of social credit system for IPR protection. Then in 2018, we had the first mechanism for IPR protection, that is the joint sanctions. And in the year of 2020, last year, they start building scale rating in some locations in China. And we can actually observe this pattern for many regulatory areas in China in the past years. For example, taxation, customs, environment, and we expect that this pattern will continue in the next few years. That means at some point in the future in the system, we will have more and more joint sanctions and scale ratings. For example, based on policy from State Council last week, actually, areas that will be focused in 2021 are healthcare insurance and medications. Next slide, please. As the system evolves, to me, I think it brings both challenges and opportunities. First, on one hand, if you are unable to manage your scale ratings and one score, then you are subject to more hassle from the regulators, for example, more examinations, more inspections, and more bureaucratic barriers. Of course, the cost of non-compliance has increased a lot under CACS due to the joint sanctions. Now, thirdly, also because of the joint sanction, there has been a spillover effect. Let's say you have a misbehavior in taxation and you are blacklisted, you are jointly sanctioned due to taxation. In this case, you are unable to get the advanced AO certification in customs for your company. So the work of taxation BU actually affects your work, the work of customs BU in your company. This means this requires a high level of internal coordination within your company in China. On the other hand, there are some opportunities. I mean, first, rewards. For now, there are about 47 joint sanctions mechanisms, but only 4 joint rewards mechanisms. But still, these are some rewards. You can manage to enjoy these rewards. Also, you can use a system to track your competitors, track your partners, or some other entities you would like to track, right? Next slide, please. For now, we have been talking about what is CSCS and how it has evolved in the past years, right? I think the next question to me would be like, what are the development trends of the system? What are possible new things that are coming from the system? The first trend, I would say increased legislation. We expect that, because for now there are so many legal disputes about the system, and we expect that we will see more and more legislations in the coming years to legitimize CSCS and to improve rule of law under the system. Second, local blacklisting standards and sanctions would stay and expand. The December policy by State Council last year, the central government actually allows local governments to develop their own blacklisting standards and sanctions. Third, credit repair mechanisms. There will be 3 forms of credit repair mechanism or ways. Let's say, in the worst case, if you have a negative record in the system, there will be a way to repair your credit. And fourth, the Chinese government has promised to provide better data and privacy protection. And fifth, as I was saying in the previous slides, we will see more scale ratings and one score in the coming years. For example, the Shanghai government has been planning to have the one score by the end of 2023. That means in 2 or 3 years. For your companies located in Shanghai, they're going to have this one score. And lastly, and maybe beneficial to the companies in China, there will be further centralization of national credit database. This actually comes from NDRC policy last week, where it requires Credit China to publish all scale rating results and one score on Credit China platform. That means you don't have to go to different websites to check your current rating result. Next slide, please. I mean, some trends are quite obvious, but then we also observe some quite interesting discussions going on in China among the stakeholders. On one hand, we found that all the regulators are supporting the system and are planning to implement the system. For example, we have the head of National Healthcare Security Administration, Hu Jinling. He says last year that they wanted to apply credit rating in the centralized public purchase of medications. On the other hand, for all these legal professionals, including legislators in Jiangsu and legal professors from Beijing University, they both are kind of questioning the legitimacy of the system and wanted to improve rule of law under the system. Next slide, please. For now, we have talked about, I think for now we should have had a big picture of the system, right? What is CSS, how does it operate, and what are the possible future development trends? But then last question of my presentation today would be how to get organized, how to get prepared for this regulatory change, right? Next slide, please. On this slide, we provide 6 steps to based on the best practice we observed from our clients in the past years. I mean, after all this introduction of the system, you must be asking yourself, right? What are all the mechanisms that are affecting my companies in China, right? So that would be exactly the first step, to identify all applicable mechanisms that are affecting your companies in China. After that, you need to set your own CSCS targets, right? What's your target for these scale ratings? Do you want to be a model in the system, or you don't really care if you're jointly sanctioned? Based on your selected target, you need to develop a set of list of requirements. You get this requirement from the regulators, and you have to compare your current performance with this list of requirements, and then identify all potential gaps, then close the gaps. Then also you have to enable your staff in China. This is quite a new topic, and many people are not aware of this, the impact of this system. Then in the long term, you can start managing ratings to maintain a performance in the system, right? You have to monitor policies. I mean, we have been monitoring policies, and in my personal experience, we actually see new policies almost every week, sometimes more, sometimes less, but you will see some every week. And also you can, lastly, you can try to exploit advantages of the system. Next slide, please. And this is actually exactly the service we're providing. We provide CSS analysis services. We identify for you all the applicable mechanisms, and we find out for you your current position in the system. We also provide optional CSS management services. We can establish clear ownership for each mechanism and facilitate the implementation of CSS management within your companies in China. And lastly, we also provide CSS monitoring services. If there are any new policies affecting your company in China, you will be notified by us. Next slide. And this actually concludes my presentation today. Again, many thanks to SCCC for providing this platform for discussion, and also I'm very much looking forward to the sharing from Sabine and Barney, and also to the very interesting QA section. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Hai-Lin. That was a very interesting presentation. We learned about all these steps and the background, and I'm sure there will be many more questions coming in. We had two, but we will take up the questions at the end. I would now like to hand over to Sabine for her presentation. Thank you very much, Sabine.
Thank you very much, Esther, and good morning to Switzerland from Shanghai. I'm delighted to be back at Swiss Chinese Chamber of Commerce to give an update on the CSCS from a legal perspective. And before we go into the subject of my presentation, let me introduce Kellerhaus Carrar to you in a few words. We have more than 200 legal professionals in our firm, and our history dates back to 1885. We have a specific and special setup in China because we collaborate with a local law firm. Our Kellerhaus Carrar team consists of around 10 colleagues, and I've been based in Shanghai for 2 years, and I also speak Chinese. So let's look what is on the menu for today. Next slide. So I will cover the 4 next questions that were set out in the invitation. The first one, we will go into more details about what the Swiss companies need to know about sanctions and rewards, and about how they can boost their company's credit score. The second part will be about remedies. So what can a company do if their credit rating is negatively affected, or if they have been sanctioned? And what happens if there is a wrongful negative credit or a wrong sanction? Then we go to the more legal aspects of how to manage CSCS, which is how should you adapt your contracts with Chinese parties. And the last part will be what exactly do you need to amend in your compliance management if you have a Chinese joint venture or a subsidiary operating in the Chinese market. So let's start with sanctions and rewards. Next slide. So before we go into the details of this slide, and you will be able to obtain the slides after the presentation, so I will not read the content of the slide. What I would like to focus on first is that you understand that there are more general sanctions which apply across sectors, but there are also sector-specific sanctions which are only applicable to your company if you're dealing in that specific sector. For instance, healthcare, or if you're a trading company, you will be much more focused on customs regulations than another company. So Hai-Lin has already mentioned that you can be blacklisted, and we will look at an example in the next few slides. If you're blacklisted, it means your company operations are severely impacted, if not halted. There is another category of a sanction, which is a heavily distrusted entity. It's a bit less than being blacklisted, but essentially the consequences are severe as well. If you are sanctioned, you can be sure that the Chinese authorities will target your company much more with audits or inspections. And what Hai-Lin has explained is the joint sanctioning mechanism means that if you are sanctioned in tax, maybe the customs authorities will conduct deeper inspections in your customs operations, even though you probably never had a customs issue before. And the joint sanctioning mechanism functions through memoranda of understanding between different government authorities. Import-export restrictions is another category, but I think what is particularly challenging is that your access to financing in the Chinese market can be impacted. So your access to loans can be restricted, also to public procurement. So especially for Swiss SMEs who are dealing in infrastructure, tools, machinery, who have high precision tools, who deal with state-owned enterprises, if you cannot be part of public tenders, if this is your main business scope in China, this will be a huge issue. So an example of a sector-specific credit rating, which was only released in the second half of 2020, is regarding medical or healthcare companies. So there is a new medical price and bidding and purchasing credit rating that has been introduced in late 2020. It means basically that if your company is caught with, for instance, bribery in the medical business, abuse of a monopolistic status in the market, if you are behaving improperly with pricing, etc., your specific medical rating will be reduced. And it can lead that you are not allowed anymore to purchase drugs or medical consumables. So this is an example of a very specific sanctioning mechanism, which is targeting a specific industry. And as Hailin as well pointed out, COVID has led to an increased focus on healthcare and medical regulations. On the flip side, the possible rewards, what goes to the negative also goes to the positive. I think what we can say for now is that the sanctions are much more developed than the rewards, which is probably not surprising, but still there are rewards in the system, which means if you are a very good taxpayer, there will be, for instance, less inspections in your customs procedures. You can even improve your credit score so that you will be achieving lower taxes, or you will be treated with priority in administrative procedures, which can be an immense advantage if you're operating in China, if you have a fast track access to administration. The red listing is the counterpart to the blacklist. So the red list is something very positive. It basically means you're excelling at being compliant in the respective category. And an example that I quite liked is also very recent. It's the financing platform for SMEs. Although it has been established in 2019 already, there has been a new announcement just in November last year, which basically states that the competent authorities have the power to recommend SMEs with positive credit records to the finance institutions on a monthly basis. So if your SME is operating with a positive credit score, it can actually mean that you're handed over to the financing institutions and will be much easier for you to get a loan. So the question on the bottom, how to improve your company's credit score, is of course, you don't need to be 200% compliant from the start, but I think if you improve the specific credit ratings in the sectors that you're operating, it will positively affect the rest of your operations because of these joint mechanisms that is in the system. Next slide, please. So I randomly picked these two examples. The first one of the Nestlé subsidiary, Woofy, is wholly foreign-owned enterprise. So it's basically the subsidiary of Nestlé in China. So I do not know whether anyone from Nestlé is joining this call. So apologies in advance if I picked your company. This is a good example. This is why I allow myself to do it. Nestlé is a grade A taxpayer in China. So you see on the top of the screen that it has been red listed. So Nestlé will benefit from other positive treatment because it is a grade A taxpayer. On the next slide, we will see an example of a blacklisted company. I have no idea what this company is doing. but it has been blacklisted, which can be seen from the black banner on top. And on the bottom, we see that there is a listing for a dishonest person subject to enforcement, which can mean, for instance, that the legal representative or the company's general manager has not filed his tax reports or has not paid its taxes, which can then negatively affect the whole company's credit rating. Next slide, please. So if we talk about sanctions, we also need to know what we can do if a sanction or a credit rating is on the table, and what we can do if the rating is even wrong. So let's move to the next slide and have a look what happens if there is a negative credit score or an administrative penalty. What Hai-Lin has mentioned is that the system is still under development. So while there are already channels established how you can apply to restore a negative credit, it is still quite spread out in different regulations. There is no centralized core legislation that encompasses the whole credit system. So there are a few guidelines, but there are still different approaches depending on the sector of the rating we are talking about. So one example I would like to make is credit restoration via Credit China. So the two pictures that I have showed before are examples from Credit China from the website. And there is a specific mechanism on the website where you can apply online to restore your credit. So what is also part of the system is that a negative credit score is usually recorded for a minimum period depending on the severity of the misbehavior. And once this minimum period has lapsed, you will be able, or your company will be able to apply for a restoration of the credit. If the misbehavior is only light, usually it is sufficient if you submit a commitment letter, for instance, from the legal representative of the company, promising to the respective authority that in the future compliance will be done. If the misbehavior is more severe, a letter of commitment will not be enough. That is clear, I think, as well. So basically, you will be required to prove that you have repaired the non-compliance fully, and you need to submit the respective documents to prove it. On the administrative remedies side, I think what is helpful for a Swiss mind to translate is the administrative penalties or the sanctions are in essence Verwaltungsstrafen. So it's distinct from criminal law, but it's something that is still öffentliches Recht, so public law, which means if we're talking about administrative penalties, we will also have the corresponding remedies under administrative law. So we have to separate credit ratings and administrative sanctions on the other side. I will spare you the details of the distinctions between the 4 different remedies that are available. So depending on the authority that has issued the respective sanction, you will either go to the court or you will go to the authority that has issued the original sanction. So what happens if your company is subjected to a wrong credit rating or even an unjustified sanction? So I think this is the worst case scenario one can think of if you're talking about operations. What happens? So as said, there are only a few guidelines so far, which are at the company's disposal to help you understand what you can do if you have a negative credit score or an administrative penalty. But actually, just on December 18 last year, there has been a new guiding opinion that mentioned for the first time that relevant authorities and persons shall bear liability for issuing an incorrect credit rating and sanctions. Although this goes in the right direction, there has been no specific remedies or responsibilities yet defined in this guiding opinion, but we see that was what Hailin has said very correctly, is that the legalization of this whole system is really underway. And we see that they're gradually adding layers of complexity, but also of remedies if many, for instance, of these algorithm-based ratings have errors in the system. So I think in our experience, it's definitely possible to talk to the authorities. That's always possible. And the number one is that you talk to the authority that is in charge of the respective sector that we're talking about. So if the sanction is in tax, you will go to the tax authority. If you have been sanctioned in customs, you will go to the customs authority. So for now, we have to live with this uncertainty. I think for people dealing with Chinese operations, it's not something unusual, but we need to be aware of it. Next slide, please. So what does this whole system mean for your contracts? Next slide. I would like to focus on 3 key agreements that most of the Swiss companies who are dealing in China will have in their operations. 1, supply chain, 2, distribution, and 3, joint ventures. So let me just highlight a few of these bullet points, which you are free to read afterwards in the slides. I think the credit system is really a process. So what you need to do is include processes in your contracts. So one aspect which we see and include in our contracts if we do supply chain agreements or purchase agreements is your supplier needs to report on a regular basis. It needs to report that it is complying. It needs to report what is it doing to maintain compliance with the different regulatory requirements, which is especially important if you're sourcing raw materials or if you're dealing in industries, in dirty industries, for instance, where you have environmental and quality aspects that you need to consider. From the Swiss perspective, if you're the purchaser, you need to have inspection rights on the ground, which allow you to ensure that compliance is actually lived. The representations and warranties is nothing new, but still you will be much more careful if you're drafting a new agreement, because you just need the assurance that you have something in your hand to enforce if the supplier is non-compliant. And then the last part that I want to mention is remedies in case of disruption. So we have seen before, if there is a blacklisting of a company, let's say your supplier is blacklisted, it can basically mean that their operations are brought to an end. And then if your good is not produced anymore because of the blacklisting, you at least need to have a contractual remedy against your supplier because of the blacklisting. It's not force majeure, so you need to address it in the contract. On the distribution side, we are increasingly dealing with pharmaceutical distribution agreements, medical device distribution agreements, and their permits and licenses of the distributor are key. We are currently, for instance, negotiating for a Swiss client who is in the medical device industry, and their distributor in China has not upheld the local product registrations in accordance with the local regulations. So the contract has been drafted more than 20 years ago, and of course the credit system was not existing back then. But still, if you have the chance to renegotiate a distribution agreement or any other agreement, you need to think about how can we address and implement the credit system in these contracts. Yes, let's go to the next slide. In the interest of time, you will be able to understand the rest of the points on this slide. If you're doing a joint venture in China, due diligence has become more easy in a way because the information is public. So all these platforms that we have seen, they are publicly accessible, which allows you to have a better understanding without or before even going to a data room. One more point on this slide, you need to have audit and inspection rights in the joint venture relating, for instance, to tax, accounting, and company job management. company chops are the stamps of a Chinese company, which allow you to legally sign a contract. One more point, supervisors, that's a specific creature of Chinese company law. It's kind of an Aufpasser or an Aufseher in German, which means they can initiate legal proceedings against management and directors. And it's, in terms of compliance, a crucial element in any Chinese company. So let me use the remaining minutes of my presentation to go to compliance management. The existing compliance framework in China is quite scattered. The basis of a company is the company law. Then we have, since last year, the new foreign investment law, which now makes the company law also applicable to all foreign invested companies operating in China, as well as joint ventures. In China, we don't have a so-called internal control system that we know from the Code of Obligations. And we are dealing with selective law enforcement, which is, I think, reinforced by the corporate social credit system. And the next point on the slide is that what we have already touched upon is that currently we only have a cluster of local and regional regulations, as well as trial practices. And we expect that the overarching CSCS law will enter into force next year. So for the next slide and the last of my presentation, what do you need to do to adjust your China business in a compliant way? So governance 2.0 is a very generalized term, but I think what you have, if you take what we have covered in this webinar today, is that it's not only a one-step approach that you need to take, but you need to be very mindful of a couple or a set of different elements in your compliance organization. So we're not only talking about additional reporting obligations, which are probably more easy to fulfill, but you need to go on a local level and familiarize yourself with the local regulations that are already in force and will be enforced. Due diligence. So know your contract partner before signing, and do your homework when you hire executives and after you have hired your executives. The last point I would like to mention on this slide, to end on a positive note, is do try to become an industry leader and get red listed. So it means if you do your homework, it's not an impossible task to be compliant under the CSCS, but if you do that, you might actually even market your industry leader status or being red listed and profit from rewards that we have discussed earlier in the presentation. So I'm very much looking forward to concluding at this point and to your questions in the Q&A. And if you have any other questions after the presentation, here is my email address. Let me know, and I'm looking forward to be in contact. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sabine, for your very interesting and informative input. We will move on to our third sort of input speaker, Stefan Barney. He is from Switzerland Global Enterprise, as you can see on the slide. He has extensive executive level experience in the chemical, pharmaceutical, and consulting industry before he then changed to become a member of the SGE. He joined SGE in 2013 as senior consultant for the export promotion activities to Japan and South Korea. Since 2017, he has taken over the responsibility for Asia, Middle East, Africa, and Pacific within the global network team of the SGE. So he has the capacity to compare all these countries, all these developments, because he follows very closely, and especially the developments on site in China. So I'm very grateful to have you here for your input. Thank you very much, Stefan.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Esther, for this introduction. And thank you very much to the both speakers, to Sabine and also to Harleen. And I'm very glad what we were learning today, from them, because that's also what we are seeing in our business hub in Beijing, and where we have 3 locations in China overall, with an operation of about 10 people. We have heard that it is an ongoing project. It is something that is still in process. I think it's also the COVID crisis didn't really help to advance the whole databases behind the scenes, behind these different departments. What we have seen within our Swiss community in China, where we are always in contact with them, we have engaged them, we have talked to them, we have always questions from them. We would have liked to present a Swiss SME or even a bigger company here in this webinar to comment on the system and their experiences and everything. However, we have not been able to find someone who really would like to openly discuss on the system, on their experiences. What we can see and what they were telling us is really that it is a process that is of great interest. I think it is a project that is a nationwide project. There are certain cities that are more advanced. However, the lack of actual practice, of experiences, what we also heard from Sabine and Hailin before, it's very difficult to really make statements how this is going to be interpreted in the long run. We are trying also to compare it, as we had the free trade agreement in place with China, between Switzerland and China, 2014. We had in the beginning tremendous problems also with customs, because you have to imagine that about 46,000 customs officers had to be aware of what is in the free trade agreement and to apply the rules that are in there really competently and giving a straightforward customs clearance. So therefore we expect also in this system that we are seeing a period of uncertainty on adjustments, and we really believe what also Sabine said before: familiarize yourself with the local regulations, try to comply, and try to be red listed, so that you're not going to have hard awakenings and being sanctioned. I think if you're once on a radar, then it will be definitely a problem. And also the audience today, over 100 participants in this webinar, is showing that it is of greatest interest to Swiss companies to get familiar with the topics, and it is an ongoing process. So therefore, I think I'm sure that we will have a follow-up webinar and giving you maybe the next time also some insights from companies that are experiencing that red or blacklisted system. So therefore, that's from my side. Back to you, Esther.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for this valuable input. So we can see it's all a developing target, as we already said. And this brings us to the various questions that we have from the audience. I think the first one goes directly to Hailin. Excuse me, I have a technical issue here on the questions. Yes, 1 second. Yes, regarding a question to Mr. Wang, it says, interesting presentation, Mr. Wang. Could you tell us more about the 3 types of credit repair? What are they, and do companies use them in practice instead of objection procedures as well?
Yes. Sorry, could we just go back to slide 15? The one with 6 strings. Sorry, 15, and it is 15 actually. Sorry, yes, exactly. Thank you so much. Firstly, yes, but then 2 points. First point is that you can appear before before decision about your credit ratings or record. If you think the authority made a mistake about your credit rating, you can appear. For example, we have a client in the northeastern part of China. They were blacklisted due to a taxation problem, but then at the end, that's a mistake by the taxation authority. They appeared and they were removed from the blacklisted. But then regarding the credit repair we are talking about here, that's based on the fact that you did have a misbehavior and you get some negative things in the system. In that case, after a certain period of time, you can do the credit repair. There are three possible, based on for different results, there are three scenarios. They can remove your negative record from the website. They can remove your record from their database, so it does not exist anymore in this world. And also, you can be removed from a blacklist. So this corresponds to different scenarios. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Okay, thank you very much. We go further on to other questions. I think you're free to address them, either of you. So one question is here, is there an overview available of all criteria that are used to rate the company?
Maybe I can start. Officially, no, there's no one official document that contains all these rating criteria or rating requirements, but we have a database and we can provide such a document containing all these rating criteria, policies and everything. And it's about hundreds of pages long.
I think that's one of the challenges of the system, that it's not one size fits all, but it's really a sector specific rating mechanism, and each company is active in different business fields. So you will need to do your homework to find out which rating requirements apply to your company.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question is, do you perceive a threat for a Western company that the China government gets insight into global operation and data through bigger transparency? Is there some evidence that China's government is misusing the information to get insights into data, technology, IP through the inspections?
Maybe I can start on this one. So from my perspective, this is not the angle of the system. Interestingly, in November, there was the publication of the Personal Information Protection Law, the draft for public comments, which means that China is enforcing actually data protection and secrecy. So I think the CSCS was really targeting the market or the market actors, but it's to establish a level playing field among market actors. But to my knowledge, it's not a tool for the government to inspect or specifically target a company that is operating normally, but it's a tool to sanction or to reward companies who are either not compliant or compliant.
To me, I think for the first question, of course, data collection and especially centralization has been increased under CSCS. I mean, the Chinese government has a much better view of your company, but very much is about the regulatory compliance data. But then for the second question, I agree with Sabine. The answer is no. I do not see evidence for such, such insights. And also I have to mention the December policy about CSCS by State Council last December, where it says they require to increase data and the privacy protection of the system.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there are two questions which have been addressed and are already a bit in relation to what has been discussed. I just would want to make sure that we address all of them. Do all provinces need, which is to implement all mechanisms? And is it possible to understand the calculation of the score? I think we discussed the questions a bit already, but is there further input from your side?
Maybe I can start. I mean, first 2 points. Nationwide, all the ministries, they have the authority to decide what kind of mechanism they would like to develop in their own regulatory field, and the local regulator must follow the ministry's plan. Second, as I said, in the December policy, now the local regulators, they also have the authority to develop their own mechanisms. If you ask me, there's a need to implement all mechanisms, no, but in fact, slowly and slowly, we see more and more mechanisms from the system.
Yeah, I think that is very specific to China, that we while we have a certain or a strong centralization aspect, which is still in the implementation, we do have a very strong localized practice, which is not only in terms of the CSCS, but also if you're, let's say, talking about commercial registries, local practices. If you can do one thing in Shanghai, it will be different in Beijing for sure. So the local governments do have quite a lot of authority to implement their local practices as they deem fit within the overarching framework.
Okay, thank you very much. One more question to all the participants. Dear panelists, from your experience, which kind of SES punishment troubles companies more? Joint administrative agency punishments, such as restrictions on government, procurement, bridgings, or biddings, excuse me, or the reputational penalties realized through the massive disclosure of administrative enforcement information to potential partners, clients, suppliers, etc. The question goes to all three of you.
I think it's a good question, but I think it depends on what your company is doing. If you are in the B2B sector, if you're manufacturing, joint administrative agency punishments will be much more dangerous to your operations because you don't have the reputational aspect. But if you are in the healthcare system, I'm just making an example, if you're producing milk powder, or if you're producing goods that have a public reach or public visibility, the disclosure of administrative enforcement publicly will much more affect you. So I think this question really depends on what sector your company is targeting, and depending on that, you will have to monitor the CSCS from a different angle.
I think also from my side, I think the companies are not really at this point in time able to answer the question on the dot. I believe that they have too less experiences, and I share Sabine's statement. It depends in which area you are going to be active in which industry. And just imagine the social media channels that you have in China. I mean, you can also have, if you're in the B2B or in the B2C business, you can have certain shitstorms that are going to affect your sales immediately if you are going to be on a certain list, blacklisted or whatever. So therefore, I think it is really depending on the industry, and it's too less experience available at this point in time to really make a firm statement on that.
Any comment from your side?
Okay, I will continue. I think this really depends on the industry, as both Sabine and Barney has been saying. And to me, I think the most serious measure would be like you are excluded from certain market. For example, if you heavily rely on public procurement, but then for some blacklisting measures, you could be not allowed to participate in public procurement anymore.
Okay. So it depends a bit on the business. That's what we conclude. I have two more questions. One is a follow-up question, a very logical one, actually. Isn't there any ambition in China to harmonize the different local systems and criteria? I think it goes to the panel as well, the question.
As far as I understand, I think, yes, there is the ambition to have a nationwide system in place that is working in every single province. However, as we have heard before, it is very, very much centralized or directed from Beijing to the various cities and prefectures. So therefore, by the end of the day, in this process, it would be definitely of interest, in my opinion, from China to have a harmonized system nationwide. But this will take a while till it is really harmonized. So therefore, it is a process over many years, I would expect.
Sorry, I beg to disagree, because of course, if you talk about the database is centralized. But then if we move back to the State Council's December policy last year about CSCS, as I said before, the central government actually allows the local governments to develop their own criteria.
Okay. Thank you. There's an interesting question on the IP side. To what extent is the CSCS applied to local companies in case these companies violate foreign IP rights? Does this impact the willingness of local administration to go after these companies? Are CSCS records also part of the IP publicly, the violations, I presume it means publicly available. So the question here would also be, is it publicly available if your company in China or a company in China violates IP rights? Would that be publicly available?
Yeah, so I understand that what Hailin has mentioned, that there are specific IP developments underway. So to my understanding, up to now, I think it's 12 Chinese cities, including Shanghai and Beijing. They're specifically working on IP related ratings. And what is already publicly available is if a company is involved in litigations. So in China, it is possible to access the database of the Supreme People's Court. And if your company has been part of or a counterparty defendant in a judgment, or if you're subject to enforcement of an award regarding IP, this will be publicly registered. So yes, in certain circumstances, if a company is violating IP rights, you would be able to see that. But I think that the system is still not at a level where you would be able to specifically target these kind of squatting companies, which we are dealing with for our clients, so who are squatting on trade names and trademarks. But that's, of course, that would be a huge advantage for IP protection in China.
Yeah. Does this mean any sort of court proceedings would be listed on that website finally, or is it just the Supreme People's Court?
No, also from the lower court. It's just that the administration is attached there. But even if you have a first instance judgment or an intermediate People's Court judgment, you will find the record in the database.
Okay, so that's very promising. Mr. Thomas, who raised this question, he now comes back with the follow-up question. He says he did not really talk about litigation, but about administrative actions in the IP-related issues, because you always have these two options.
I mean, maybe litigation was not the right term, but I agree. Of course, it similarly applies if you are talking about IP, for instance, in an invalidation procedure, whether we call it litigation or we call it administrative action, it's the same.
Okay.
That's been referring to the
yes,
the possible administrative penalties due to the violation of IPR rights. Of course, as I said, this violation always leads to negative record in the system, which is public. And also, if one company repeatedly violates your IP right, he will be blacklisted, and this information will be publicly available as well.
So, thank you. One last question is a cultural question. When we saw these ratings, you see this red light, and Sabine mentioned you should become a sort of red company. So the meaning would be, why is red used and not white? As a European perception, we would go the other way around, wouldn't we? So from a cultural background.
I will take the question because I'm wearing red today. So thank you, Michael, for the question. I remember when I first encountered CSCS, I was also asking why is red positive? But actually in China, red is very positively connotated in terms of wealth, in terms of well-being. So if you're looking around now with the Chinese New Year approaching, red is everywhere. So from a Chinese perspective, red listing is indeed something good, and white or green is less common.
Okay, so I think we answered all the questions. Thank you very much. Are there any follow-up issues from the panel side? Any issues that you would like to add on the question part or in general? Okay, if not, we will conclude today's session. We would like to thank all of you for your attention, for attending the seminar today. And I would like to extend a real warm thanks to our speakers today who have taken their time to discuss these issues with us. I'm sure there will be more seminars on the topic which will remain with us. To the audience, I would like to say that you can follow us on the WeChat, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We're on the social media. We have a very active channel manager, so please be linked and remain linked with us for further information. Thank you all very much and have a good rest of the day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.